You want to have a MouseOver effect in PowerPoint. And so when I park my mouse over here, these explanations pop out. Most people are going to tell you, well, what you need to do is set up another sheet and just be on a MouseOver, hyperlink to that sheet and go back and forth. Well, that's inelegant. I'm going to show you a different way. And what you're going to do is you're going to hit Alt F11, and that will bring up the VBA pane. And if you're new to VBA, it is indeed a pain. Okay, because I have 8 things here that I want to do, I had to do this 8 times. If you only need 1, then you do 1. Anyway, you want to type in sub, whatever you want to name your macro, and then copy this thing. Slideshow windows, parentheses 1, close parentheses, dot view, dot slide, dot shapes, open parentheses, quote, and then I'll talk about speech bubble file name, close quote, close parentheses, dot visible equals true, then copy and paste it, give it a different name, and leave everything else the same, and name it visible equals false. Okay. What does this C1 on and C1 off mean? Well, what I did was I just drew some shapes. I drew a circle, made it solid, put the number 1 in it, drew another circle, and had no fill on it, but left the border. And so I named this circle here, you can see on the selection pane, C1 on. C1 on lights up. When I click the littler or the bigger one, C1 off lights up. And that's what I named it. You're going to have to change those names. And you're going to want to change those names because PowerPoint named mine Oval 5, Oval 6, Oval 7. And so I'd rather it be C1 on and C1 off because when I get to my VBA pane, I can name my macro the same thing as I named the circle. Okay. That is that thing. Then I had it create. I didn't have it create. I created a speech bubble. And so I'll just pick this top one here and point it at the highlight, and I filled in my thing. Then you click this little I here, and that makes it go away by default. And you have to rename it, because mine was like Speech Bubble 1, Speech Bubble 2. I wanted it to kind of be descriptive, so I named mine to Speech Bubble Metadata, because this thing here underlying is the metadata pane in Tableau, and so I wanted to have the definition of what the metadata pane was pop out when I put my mouse over the number 8. Okay. So, in this slideshow Windows 1 blah blah blah, all you have to do is change speech bubble blah 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 to whatever you named it here for the visible equals true and the visible equals false. So what happens is when you're cruising along, Shift F5, I cruise along, and the moment, watch when my cursor hits that 1. It pops out. Now watch what happens when my cursor goes across that outer circle. It goes away. On, off, on, off. And so that is the naming convention. Okay. Last thing. When you go to the selection pane, to get to the selection pane, it's kind of an important thing. You're on the home screen here. We'll go out here to select selection pane. You can drag and drop the order of these things. Watch what happens when I take picture 4, which is my background image, and I bring it all the way up to the top. Now it's in front of everything. It's on top. You don't want that. I want it on the back. So you need to be careful, because if I turn on my speech bubble, not that one of these will overlap that 4. See how my sheet's speech bubble overlaps my 4? So you want to have the speech bubbles in front of all your numbers and circles, because if my speech bubble 4 were on here and then I turn on, where'd it go? That is sheets. Now the 4 stays active because technically it's in front of that speech bubble. And I don't want it there. So, another good reason to have your naming conventions. So, I put my speech bubbles at the front, and since they're all hidden, they're not going to overlap on each other. Then I have all my turn-on indicators up here because I want them to be in front of the turn-off indicators, because if the C4 off were in front of the C4 on, my mouse would never roll over the 4 because it wouldn't see it, because it's technically behind the off. So I'd always be turning off the speech bubble. So you want to have your speech bubbles on the top, or whatever you want to appear. Then you want to have whatever triggers this to appear. And then you want to have whatever turns it off at the bottom. And then, because I'm a professor, I need to let my students know, hey, if you're not in presentation mode, this isn't going to work. So hit Shift F5 to be in presentation mode, because as you can see, I'm parking my mouse over this and nothing is happening. So you got to hit Shift F5, and then the underlying picture that I want to talk about, or I want the students to learn about, is at the very bottom, and everything is on top of that back image. So, future Zim, hopefully this is helpful. And anybody else that happens upon this video, hopefully this was helpful. Okay, you've got all your macros written, you've got everything done, you've got everything stacked in the order you want it, and you go, you open up your presentation, and you mouse over stuff, and nothing happens. You got to do this last step. And so that last step is, I'm going to view in, I'm going to zoom in actually, I'm going to crunch in, let's get really big here, and I'm just going to pick on number 6, because now you should be able to see, especially in post when I zoom in, you should be able to see the difference between selecting the 6 circle and selecting the ring around the 6 circle. You want to select the circle, the filled in circle with the number, and you want to go to Insert, Action, and MouseOver, and then you want it to run a macro, and I'm going to name this, since this is 6, this is why you name it the same thing as you name everything else, C6 on, and then hit OK. Then I can click the outer ring here and go to Action, and on MouseOver, I want to run my macro, and this time I want to run C6 off, and hit OK. So now what happens is, when we're in presentation mode and my cursor's coming along, boom, when it hits this, the speech bubble's going to pop. And then when I move away and my mouse crosses this outer ring, that's going to fire the turn off macro, C6 off, and the speech bubble goes away. And you'll have to go through and assign the macro on to the inner image and the macro off to the outer image, so that way as you mouse around, it turns on and off.